what we started talking about before we hit record, I thought was really interesting because I'm a college dropout. So I spent about 2.5 years in school, and I'm curious what your experience was, looking into this, if it's something that you did or not or whatever. But for me, I was paying for school out of pocket, and I wanted to get into sales and run a business. And none of the professors that I had at, Oregon State University, none of them had experience doing that. Like they would openly talk about, hey, I'm teaching you something. Like I remember my accounting professor, he was teaching us managerial accounting through the context of a small business owner or whatever. And he's like, yeah, I've never run a small business before. He literally went to college just to teach people about it, Yeah. But what are your thoughts on, did you look into university? Did you go to university? Like what are your kind of thoughts?
I didn't really graduate high school. So no, I'm dyslexic.
Oh, wow.
I have ADHD. I'm not academic in the slightest. So I got kicked out of sixth form, which was the thing you have to go through before a university would accept you in the UK. My view is that 90% plus of the people who have degrees don't use them. Just what you said, the professors who teach what they're teaching have never done it. It's completely irrelevant. And also, why is it 4 years long when we know that people like to try different things, especially at an early stage in their life? Your brain isn't fully formed till you're 25, right? So does it make sense to spend 4 years studying something that you might not even want to do when you try it for yourself? Why aren't we having things like TrainYo, right? An 8-week-long training course delivered by people like yourself, Jason, who are absolutely relevant to our space and have done it and can share that perspective. And then it goes a step further and actually connects you with an outcome.
Yeah. It's kind of like trade school for salespeople, dude.
Yeah. Trade school.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a massive opportunity to disrupt not just SDR, not just sales, not just tech, but the whole way people go about seeking employment and transitioning into other roles. It's completely flawed.
Yeah. I can't wait for, and this is kind of a loaded question actually, because I already kind of know what you probably think, but what do you think about companies requiring a college or university degree for a sales position?
It's ridiculous. So
Dude, so stupid.
Yeah. When Omar and I tried to break into tech, we were recruiting SaaS professionals, we were recruiting AEs and sales directors, not SDRs. So we didn't really have those contacts. And the way we went about it, because we were hearing about the SDR role, right? And we were like, well, this is really cool. We're kind of doing it now as a recruitment consultant, but we would get paid a lot more. We'd also be selling something that we could find some passion in and enjoyment out of. So we applied to the companies directly on LinkedIn Easy Apply, through the website. We also applied to the recruiters in the space, and either radio silence or just your standard templated rejection email. And it was all premised on the fact that predominantly we didn't have a degree. And also maybe there were some hiring biases on, hiring for the same kind of look and type that they already had in the office. But it was definitely more so the degree. And the way we got around that was by cold calling the sales directors of the HR, of the company where HR had rejected us, or a recruiter rejected us, and we would just cold call the sales directors. And I think after a week of doing that, we both landed roles and became globally top performing SDRs. So should we have been given an opportunity in the first place? Should we have had to jump through so many hoops? I don't know. What do you think?
Definitely not. I mean, you're a perfect living example of that, dude. I would not be able to get a job as a salesperson if it required a degree.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't be able to do that, and it's, there's a lot of chatter on LinkedIn about it, but I don't think companies understand the financial implications of turning down highly qualified applicants that don't have a degree. That's what I don't think that they understand. I love the mission around TrainYo of really providing that education, because I work with a lot of companies with SDR teams where they bring people in and they have zero experience. It's kind of nice to have some people that have some foundational understanding of how things work and have gone through a little bit of training. So let's take it back. So your first job as an SDR, what was that like? What kind of support did you get? All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's really great question. So my first job as an SDR, I cold called a guy called Alistair Henderson, who's now a board advisor to TrainYo and become a really good friend. And he was the enterprise sales director at Optimizely, so market leading A/B testing provider. And he referred me into the job, got it. And what they were doing was moving out. One, they'd hired a new sales SDR manager who had no SDR or SDR management experience, high performing AE, who transitioned into that role from a different company. And they were moving all of the SDRs in Europe from Germany, the UK, and just Germany and the UK to Amsterdam. So the manager started. I was the first SDR in the office. In the coming months, more SDRs started to join me as they were relocated. And I was throwing outreach, right, as my SCP, which I now love, absolutely love outreach. But at the time, I was like, well, what's this? I know what Salesforce is because I've used that in recruitment. But what's outreach? Why do we need another piece of tech? And no one really explained that to me. All I saw it was, it's simply a burden. I was like, I've got my spreadsheet, I've got my phone. I like these data tools you have, but why do I need a sequence, right? And the most annoying thing for me is, as someone who's dyslexic, I really struggle with adapting to new technology and processes that are foreign to me. There's partly a stigma, I think, in my mind. And that stigma is encouraged when you don't receive a proper onboarding. So my manager actually started a day after me, had never seen outreach in his life, never been an SDR. I was more familiar with outbound sales processes to a degree at that point in time than he probably was. So I had a really painful 3 months trying to figure out what outreach was and why it was useful. And after those 3 months, I fell in love with it. But I was constantly working against red tape in the system. SDRs at that company were all measured the same. So you would have to make 600 emails a week. It was
holy moly.
250 dials a week, which isn't that high, I don't think. But the 600 emails is stupid. There was some other KPIs I can't remember, to be honest. But as someone who is very verbal and likes to deal with people and is dyslexic as how, I can't write emails, but I can do really well on the phone. I've learned how to write emails through, being an SDR for a few years quite effectively. But at the time, I could pick up the phone and I was only ringing mobile numbers because that's very easy to identify in the UK. So I had a 50% pickup ratio. And out of the people who picked up, I would book about 40% of those into meetings, into next steps. So my conversion rate was crazy high because I knew the problem we solved and was able to articulate it in a smooth way. And all I asked was, hey, can I just spend all my time on the phones and also do video prospecting because I was really good at that. And I don't want to send emails unless they're follow-up emails because I think follow-up emails are really necessary. But me doing cold outbound on email is achieving nothing. And I was told no, right? And because of that, I had to fake my emails in the SEP. That's what I did. But that took me 3 hours a week to fake all of these KPIs. And then I was still hitting my quota off just cold calling. Could have been overachieving my quota if I was left to just do it about the way that I was going to be successful. And the other side to it is as well, they didn't trust the SDR. So the SDR team was run out of the US, but the UK AEs were run out of the UK. And I had a great relationship with all of senior leadership in the UK, and they really bought into the strategy I was developing. I put forward a 16-page business document in the first 3 months of all the things we could do that they were doing in the US and we weren't doing in the UK, and other things as well, like tracking people who'd used that product before when they go to a new company. So there's now a company called User Gems that does that, but you could do it in Sales Navigator. And what actually happened was they hired a new sales development director when I was due to be promoted into a strategic role, because that business case got signed off and by the VP of EMEA and everyone in EMEA. And then that same VP turned around and said, hey, we've just hired X person. She is now in charge of your whole division of the SDRs globally. So I can't approve this anymore. I could, but I don't want to kind of chop her legs out from under her. She's just started. So have a meeting with her and she will approve it. And in that meeting, it's a 16-page long business case. I met with that leader after being really passionate, not sleeping for 3 days writing this business case, like working literally nights for 3 days while working the day job. And we sat in that meeting and she said, hey, so what's the gist of the document? And bearing in mind, there was over 5 senior leaders in Europe who had read this entirely and agreed with it. And I was like, well, we've got 30 minutes. I can't really give you the gist of it in 30 minutes because there's like appendices, there's all these resources, all these data points. But here's my 5-minute gist of it. And the response was, you already do that. I was like, well, no, we don't. And I've articulated why and where we don't. And it was just thrown out. And in that meeting, I became frustrated because I put an insane amount of work in and been told to do it by my management team. And then it was just completely thrown out because there was a new hire made. And that really disincentivized me. So then the short story is, after 10 months of being one of the top performing SDRs and certainly the fastest to ramp and all of those good things, I was asked to leave and I was paid to leave. And an email of protest went round because of that. So it was a very interesting experience.
Oh man, where to go from here? So the theme of this episode is painful sales leadership lessons. And I want to I want to dig into a few of those, because one thing that I often hear from reps, and I see this too with the sales leaders I work with, is they want their reps to be team players. Mm-hmm. And you just shared a story with me that I don't know if to that degree is super common, but that happens a lot where reps are encouraged, I put air quotes on that, to be a team player and to contribute. Yet when they have something valid to share, it just gets met with nothing but resistance, not an open, and they just don't give you that same respect in return. How do you think that, just in your experience, what could sales teams do to create a better environment where reps do feel like they can, give it, do it for the team, kind of thing, be a team player? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I would look at how we are doing it at TrainYo, and we do a lot of consulting with people who hire a lot of SDRs right now, and that advice seems to be working. What I will say is, Optimizely was a 600-person organization when I was there. TrainYo is a 10-person organization, so I presume there's going to be some scale challenges to something like this. But what we try to do is really empower SDRs to sell in the way that they know best. We'll ramp all our SDRs the same, because we want to give them that multi-channeled foundations, the skills across the game. But then when we start to see where their bias is, what they're better at, where they're not so good, and provided that it makes sense for the business and them, we enable that and we encourage it. I think a lot more can be done to make SDRs more efficient. Like, why are you having semi-senior SDRs or experienced SDRs build their own lists when you could just have someone offshore do that for them, and they could spend more time on the phones and probably spend less time worrying about burnout and all these other things because they're juggling so many plates, right? How do you improve the longevity of the role and the effectiveness of it and build that skill over time? So it's actually profitable, and SDRs can see a future in the SDR role rather than forcing themselves to become an AE or an SDR manager like I had to. And I'm not a natural SDR manager. I'm not a natural AE. I don't enjoy either one of those two roles. If I was going to be in a company permanently, I would rather be a strategic SDR the whole time. But there wasn't that opportunity for me. So
let's talk about the list building thing, because I see this in companies too, where, even salaried, well-paid AEs with 350K plus OTE are having to either, one, get their access from their sales engagement tools removed, so they don't have access to Outreach or SalesLoft or Engage on Zoom Info. Their data is taken away. All of this kind of stuff. Why do companies do that? I don't understand. I've never been given a good answer. Why do you think this happens?
Well, sorry, I don't understand what you mean. Do you mean, why do you have AEs build their own lists, or why do you not give them access to their data tools?
All of the above. Like, why not just give access to these folks to get the tools, and why should they have to do it themselves? Yeah. When I literally have, I have Filipino virtual assistants that do such an awesome job. I have 3 of them that work for me full time. They do really great. They require training just like any other employee. But when it comes to list building, I don't build my own lists when I prospect. Like, it's so easy to just give them criteria. and just have them do it. And, they're $6 to $8 an hour or whatever it is. And that's good money for them. You know what I mean?
It is. You
Why
can be
do
really,
companies not do
really
this?
generous. Yeah.
I just don't understand. I don't get it.
So I don't have the answer. I think it's really stupid. Yeah, I have no idea. It makes absolute no sense. You've got an expensive resource. When we work in a world where things like Upworks exist, things like Fiverr exist, and you can just go online and you could spend 5 minutes writing an ad and the next day have 30 responses. And you can, instead of, spending 70,000, 100 KOTE, total package on a really great SDR in California and have them build their lists. Like you said, you can have your guy on $6 an hour build the perfect list for them. And going back to giving AEs access to tools, I completely agree. Especially large corporations, they pay on usage, usually not seats. So doesn't that make a ton of sense to give them access to the point tools so they can refine their data as they go? Because obviously you want the list built, but you also want to empower your people to have their own tools to be able to refine it a step further if that's necessary.
Yeah, it's like you just do the math, and if I can get 10 to 20% more output from everyone, that replaces. I'd rather do that for the same cost of hiring another full-time
probably person. Right? Like as an SDR, 30% of my time was looking for data, and I know tons of others like that.
It's crazy.
Right?
Yeah. I think a good exercise for a sales leader would be calculate what your SDR costs per hour.
Yes.
Take their pay and divide it by 2,000 hours over a year, which is what a typical person would work 40 hours a week, 50 weeks out of the year, 2 weeks for vacation. And if you just did the math on that, let's say that you have an SDR making 80,000, that person's worth $40 an hour is what their time is. So you're paying $40 an hour for someone to build a list. That's insane.
Well, that's exactly
like it is absolutely insane. You're paying 5 to 8 times more than you need to for that. And plus the opportunity cost of the pipeline that doesn't get generated because of that.
Yeah, it's a fuck up, man. It's huge. And what one person I really learned a lot from through a podcast was Chris, the founder and CEO of Sendozo. So his whole mantra is if you can pay someone else to do your job and at less than what we pay you, then do it. Every employee at Sendozo has an Upworks account. And it doesn't matter if it's a list build or whatever it is, right? That's the mantra. If you can pay someone else less to do what you do it, and then move on to the more expensive thing that your time requires, right? And at TrainYo, we're not at the stage where we've just hit profitability, right? So we're not at the stage where we can give a blank check on Upworks to every employee, but in the future, that will be the case, right? It makes complete sense for us. You've just got to empower your people and encourage them to use it responsibly because they will. They're not going to want to, when you give them a resource like that, they're going to want to keep it. They're going to want to utilize it and get an ROI from it.
Because I think this is a really big key to the burnout, piece too. It's the type of work, meaning behind the work and doing meaningful work because in sales, we're really more knowledge workers.
Yeah.
Right. This is not meant to be a job where we just do the same thing over and over and over again. I want to ask you next thing. A lot of what I'm seeing in companies too, especially with SDRs, is this tightening up of the grip around the sequence and the messaging. Literally, so many companies, I can see you're already fired up about this one. So many companies are like, you know what? You can't create a sequence anymore. You have to use our sequences. Some of them won't even let people customize it. I've seen it that extreme.
Yeah, that was my first role. So those 600 emails that I was talking about I was not able to edit them. And they were 3 paragraphs long. And they were written by US marketers for a UK market. And for Germany, right? It's even worse. Germany's like so nuanced in terms of how they do business culturally. All they would do was just translate the sequence. It's like, that doesn't work. It doesn't even read correctly. Yeah.
There's a reason why when Nike has a website and someone says, I live in Germany, it doesn't just use Google Translate and just translate it. There's so much nuance, you know that. What are your thoughts though? Because you've been in both kind of seats. You've been the sales leader, you've been the SDR. Like, what is a sweet spot of freedom that people should be giving SDRs.
So you need some hard lines, right? I think hard lines for new employees that might go a bit wild and do something that just won't, you can just see that's never going to work, and that's just going to cause a brand issue for us. I think at that point you can go, okay, let's put that one to bed. But if you trust your people, give them full creative remit. That's what we do, right? So trick is A/B test everything, iterate on everything, constantly be improving. If you're working by data, you're not going to make a mistake in the long run. It's like the movie Moneyball, right? You might not hit it out the park on one shot, but across the team, you're going to have an average that is much better than what you could have achieved by just looking for that one hit wonder. So an example of this at TrainYo is I wrote what I feel is the perfect sales sequence, right? It starts with the problem. Yeah. I wrote it, and we did it over voice note, we did it over cold calls, we did it, and everyone was at stand. It's like, oh, this is just brilliant. Sales, like as a sales nerd perspective, it's brilliant. How did it perform against our top performing SDR, Liam, who just pitch slaps what we do into the DMs? It did worse. The pitch turns out salespeople like to be pitch slapped if it's relevant. And they don't want to start with the problem. They don't want the impact. They just want to know what you're fucking talking about. And that's what Liam did, and it worked. And it's in terms of how you teach sales, it's terrible. It really is. But you can't argue with the data. And if we wouldn't have allowed Liam to do that, we wouldn't know.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a funny story, dude. There's something about, God, like, here's the visual that's frightening to me is you take a company that has, let's say 400 BDRs, SDRs, et cetera. And then you look at the messaging that they use, and that you look at who created that. And it's the collective knowledge of like 2 or 3 people that create messaging on behalf of 350 people. And the 350 people are the ones having the conversations every day.
Yeah.
And the 2 people that made it are not. They're bringing almost zero context, or they haven't had a conversation in months or years with these folks, or it's a marketing department doing it. Nothing against marketers. Usually. But when you think about that, just logically, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to approach it in that way. You know what I mean? I don't get that. Like you're throwing away this resource of 350 people that have these conversations. That's the part that's just baffling to me.
No, it really is crazy, dude. And you don't have to do it like we do it. Like we really trust our people. So I give them free reign, and I just say, look, A/B test against what we know works. And that way, if we bomb on something, at least half of the stuff is still going to work. But that hasn't happened so far. We've constantly just improved it based off the experiments they're running, because they're really good SDRs, they're really good salespeople. But if you don't want to do it to that degree, then just have like, okay, 80% of the stuff we're going to send out is we know what works today, but the 20% you're going to play with. And the moment we start seeing that that's working more, increase it to 30%, increase it to 40%, 50, 60, do it like you would run, like how Netflix run their experiments, how Google run their experiments, right? That's A/B testing to the max. Why wouldn't you do anything different in sales or with humans? It's the same thing. It's just how people buy. Maybe one's on B2C, maybe one's on B2B, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, it really is. It's at the end of the day, when you're doing outbound, you're trying to influence someone to take an action. And in this case, it's just reply to your email or say yes on a phone call or whatever it might be. The A/B testing thing, another little nugget I think that's really important from what you shared is, dude, test things that you think will not work.
Yes. Yeah.
Like do the opposite. Like take what you're doing and try something, like do an actual, there's all different kind of flavors of A/B testing. A very light version is like, I take the same email and I just change the subject line or I change the CTA. And then there's, let me just use a completely different approach and put these side by side. And I can't tell you how many times I have to be so careful as a sales trainer, because whenever I share advice, I always have to give a little asterisk that I'm a big fan of what works, that's sustainable, right? So I don't like the send a blind calendar invite to people, and you'll get meetings that way, but that's a really shitty long-term tactic. And I'm not talking that kind of stuff. I'm talking put your pitch in the email.
Yeah.
Say, how's it going at the beginning of a cold call, even though we're kind of told not to ask someone how they're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Try that stuff.
Yeah.
And what you shared is a perfect example of you have to be testing, and it's really all about what works. I think a lot of times in sales, we tend to do what feels good, and we have a lot of opinions on what works and what doesn't, and we don't
Oh, yeah.
just, like you guys are doing, let the data tell us what we should and shouldn't do.
I think it applies to sales. I think it applies to marketing. It's go to market as a whole, right?
Yep.
It spurs me on to a really relevant thought. I was at a company that does AML, so anti-money laundering, know your customer, KYC, basically spots terrorists, sex traffickers, all of that, right? Really good moral technology. And there was a massive opportunity. I came in, founded the SDR team, hired the first SDRs before TrainYo, and there was a massive opportunity to do a lot of personal branding for that company because the founder had wrote in all these international magazines. He was a Georgetown adjunct professor. Amazing story, really popular person. And that his brand would extend to us if we were talking about it in the right way and creating some cool content. We started to do that. One of the SDRs did particularly well, really well. But that SDR was terrible at on the phone, terrible at outbound email, terrible at almost every other part of the role. If I'm really honest, like not that great at the traditional SDR role, but was brilliant at creating engaging content and finding amazing leads, and then starting conversations through referral. Like could beat a traditional SDR. Could beat me on the phones just by being a wizard on LinkedIn, right? And
wow,
they weren't allowed to do it because it wasn't in line with the brand voice. Even though the results were there, even though we were showing it was working, it got shut down.
Yeah.
And that comes back to, I think it's an ego thing more than anything, right? It's like, yes, we could do this, though it works, but I don't want to be seen doing that. And that's where it's like, well, you're just getting in the way of yourself, surely.
Yeah. What advice would you have for a rep that's maybe in that position where their company's got some really tight clamps on their freedom?
Leave.
Yeah.
Now. Yeah. Go. And don't feel like you have to pitch yourself for a job in the traditional sense. I started to have real success when I just said, hey, this is what I am in an interview. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this amazing and that. And this is up for debate, right? But I was really kind of like, if you're going to hire me, I need a $5,000 budget for this to start with. And when I started being really honest with I found the best companies to work for. And that's what led to what I do today, because I had really good experiences there and that inspired me. But when I started to kind of sell myself in as the perfect candidate for what they needed, I would just find myself in a tough position because I was forced to send 600 sequenced emails a week, and I didn't have the attention span to do that.
And it doesn't position you very well in terms of, strategically in the interview where you're kind of wanting that job more than they want you, which is not a good place to be in, where you're just like, hey, take it or leave it. Here's, this is something, because we have a lot of reps in our outbound squad program, switching jobs. So they've first off, what you shared earlier about cold calling the sales leader, I highly recommend that. Works brilliantly. My wife, Sarah, got a job in a week, an account executive job in a week with a zero account executive experience by cold calling the directors, that works really well. The interview thing, I love your stance though. Like, think about what your deal breakers are and be really open about that during the interview process. Hey, I want to know how you guys think about sequences. Yeah. Am I going to be in a position where I have zero creative freedom? Because that's a deal breaker for me.
And going back to interviews, don't be afraid to negotiate. Put yourself in as the top candidate. And like in my first SDR, I was the highest paid SDR. I think there were ones on the same level as me, but we were the highest paid SDRs in the room. And the ones who were on the same level had 2 years SDR experience in different orgs, right? I had no SDR experience. All I did was they said, hey, 25K. I said, what's the maximum? I got 38.22 and a tax break. And then I find out that my future roommate, right, has 15K less base than me and has more experience than me. And what's the difference?
Yeah.
He didn't negotiate, I did. So
Yeah.
there's a lot you can do in interviews. And I think going back to how do you really, especially in your first role, how do you really impress? Something that I stole from Sam Nelson that I've always taught people to do is build a TAM of your hiring managers, and then write out a sequence in an Excel sheet. And then basically go into the interview and go, all right, I'm already an SDR. Here it is. This is how I prospected you. This is how I got the meeting. This is all the other opportunities I'm engaged with. One, it makes you a very serious candidate. It presents you in the way that you want to be presented. And two, it makes them think, shit, I've got to move on this person because I'm seeing their prospects in another 20 other companies that are great companies. And if that person is doing it like this, they're all going to want to hire him too. So,
yeah. So in other words, actually do the job to get the job.
Yes.
It's crazy. I think people are a little shy about it sometimes, but yeah, prospect, do outbound to get the job. During the interview, run it like a sales call,
Close. Yeah.
Yeah, close, ask for next steps, objection hand, do all of those kind of things. I want to hit on the activity thing because you had brought this up around 600 emails, 250 phone calls. How do you think about activity in terms of requirements, having guidelines as a tool to measure performance, productivity, that kind of thing? How do you think about activity?
So it's a great question. And I don't know if I have the answer to it at this point in time. Like I said, we're 10 people, so small company. We don't have any activity metrics whatsoever. We just you have to get 10 meetings a month, some are 15, depending on the region, and that works. We achieve it. And we have regular time. I have regular time with every SDR. So does Omar, my co-founder. So does Tom Slocum, the VP of sales, every week. A senior SDR, Liam, spends a lot of time with answering any SDR related questions because I want him to answer them from his perspective more so than I want to answer them because he's at the sharp end of it. Right. And that's how we get those insights, those real valuable golden nuggets. And yet we don't have any activity metrics. And personally, as an SDR or as a salesperson, I've never adhered to activity metrics. I've either got in trouble for not hitting them or they've accepted that that's not my thing and I'm going to hit quota regardless. So I don't like them. But as a company scales, I feel certain things will be necessary to understand the picture of data on a broader scale, but I would never go to the degree of what companies do today. Yeah.
Well, it's just like the activity metric is a number that they just pull out of their ass. You know what I mean? It's like a completely 600 emails, 250 phone calls.
Well, dude, it started as 400 and then they were like, well, we haven't got product market fit, so you're not hitting quota, so let's fucking hit up 600. And it's like, no, if we haven't got product market fit, we need to look at the messaging, not fucking just double it. That doesn't make sense,
Yeah. It'd be different if you brought someone in and said, hey, here's what we see. Quota's 10 meetings a month. Typically what a rep will do to hit that number is this number of emails and this number of phone calls. That's what an average rep will do. So there's some kind of guidelines so you know what kind of activity to put in. And you know what? Your first month, let's make these the guidelines so that you're hitting quota as quickly as possible. But I'm open to you doubling down on email if that works better for you, or doing more of the phone or doing the social thing or whatever. Like I said, it would be different if these companies, if that number actually came from somewhere. It's just a number that they make up that sounds good. It's, again, the insanity. Sales is so awesome because there is math. Like you can't quantify it.
Yeah.
These are literally numbers you can just pull out of your sales engagement platform and be like, what does a typical rep do to hit their targets? And use that as the metrics. It's just that, like, it's as simple as that. I don't understand. And what that might also show you is that maybe there are some numbers that are unattainable.
Yes.
There are a lot of startups that I interact with, and they're coming up with their sales metrics for the first time, which is kind of tough. And the thing I think that, and I'm curious your thoughts on this too, because you've done the startup thing, and you I'm sure that a lot of the clients at TrainYo are startups too.
Yeah.
But it's like the quota is based on the financial goals of the business. So they don't think about what a typical rep might attain.
Mm-hmm.
So if they need 20 meetings a month from a rep, and that's a lot of meetings, a month, unless someone's doing SMB and it's like really transactional. They just say, you got to get 20 meetings a month. They aren't even thinking about what is possible or sustainable for the individual. And do I need to hire more to hit that target that we need, or do we need to expect more? And it's just so easy to say, we just need you to double your meetings. And I don't understand it. It's something that I have a really hard time understanding. And I ask a lot of people about it. And the sense that I get is they're unwilling to be as honest as saying, it just kind of sounded good. That's just what we need. I don't know where that number came from outside of that,
Well, that's the mark of, unfortunately, a lot of leaders, right? It's they don't have the answer, but they pretend they do. And that's when you've probably got a huge problem on your hands. Yeah. No.
What are some other red flags that? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I didn't have anything more to say. Yeah.
What are some other? Because so far we've talked about this list building thing. We've talked about freedom over messaging. We've talked about activity. What are some other red flags that if someone's, an SDR, let's say, or an account executive at a company, what are some other leadership kind of red flags that people should be aware of, or things that happen that are kind of commonplace, maybe, that someone shouldn't tolerate?
So I'm not sure how common this is. I feel like it's fair to say it is, but it really comes from personal experience. I've faced a lot of age biases in my career. So I started in my first office job when I was 18, and I was the youngest person in the office by quite a way. And honestly, within about 6 to 12 months, I was better at negotiating than most of the people in the office, just because I'd always grown up doing that. Like 15 years old, I'd negotiate the car when we would go buy a new car for my mum and my dad. But I was never given the opportunity to kind of start and do the things that I was better at. I started off as a candidate resourcer. So my job was just to call up people and source them for jobs. When everyone knew I was much more suited to BD, and it took 6 months of me doing pretty well as a candidate resourcer to be turned to a 360 consultant. And then as a 360 consultant, it became very apparent that I couldn't juggle both plates. And because I have ADHD, so I have a laser focus on what I'm passionate about. And then if you give me things that I'm not so passionate about, I tend to not do them, to be frank, right? So what happened there was I was then made to struggle again for 6 months as a 360 consultant and told, hey, why don't you just go back to the candidate stuff? But fortunately, I had a good manager, Darren Brown, give him a shout out, and he had a big influence on my life. And he said, kid, I know you're really good at this BD stuff. Do you want to just do that the whole time, and I'll source your candidates for you? And this is like a guy in his late 30s, senior sales team manager, almost a director. And he's like, I'll do this shit work for you. I was very impressed by that. It didn't work out as such because he didn't have the bandwidth, but the intention was there and the offer was there. And as soon as I started doing BD, I turned up more BD than we could kind of deal with. So did that answer your question? Was that relevant? Sorry, COVID fog. Yeah.
No. It's good. What I kind of heard there is, I think that finding a company to work for that can help you leverage your strengths and what gives you energy is super important.
Yeah. So I guess that's just a bit more of the same, isn't it, in terms of what we've already said. But I think one of the things I definitely faced was age biases.
That's what you brought up, age bias.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of, there's also a lot of sexism too, I've noticed in especially account executives. I feel like companies just look at women when they hire for account executives. They look at them like through such a more harsh lens in terms of their experience.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, I don't want to speak out of place here, but a part of some of the studies behind this around women and negotiating, and women that tends to have families tend to be better negotiators because the thought is they will think about negotiating on behalf of the family instead of for themselves. And that's sort of a generality that they found in there. But I have seen that hiring managers are way more critical of a woman's experience typically, for those types of roles. But what kinds of stuff have you experienced in terms of age bias, and what should people be aware of?
So for myself, I was always the younger person in the room, and I had more than enough ability to be in the room. And I definitely face, just shit because I was younger than a lot longer than my manager. And sometimes I would have better ideas, better ways to do things. And I was kind of always a bit of a leader in the team. So whether I was a manager or not, people would go, oh, I want to do what Sunil's doing because that's working. And that would be a huge, huge problem, like a massive problem. Thing we see at TrainYo is we see age biases the other way. And that's just as fucking bad, right?
Yep.
We've got like a guy called Ben Sant, who is an amazing SDR now at a great company, but it took him 3 months to get placed after graduating the program, and he was our top performing SDR on the program. And he was in his mid-40s, ex-university professor with 2 PhDs, and he would go and smash the interviews, right? So he went and interviewed for this one company, and he said, hey, could you write out a qualification scenario for us? And he then went and applied medics to the whole thing, and then went and applied gap selling to the whole thing, and had 2 examples when they only requested 1. And the detail he went into was, I've never seen anything like it. It was brilliant. It was simply brilliant, right? And he got to the final stage along with that company and many, many others. And all he got pushed back on was culture fit. And what would happen is he would meet with an AE, he would meet with someone who is younger than him, and he would have to work alongside or for, and they would go, don't want this guy. And that was really shit, because one company saw past that, and now he's exactly what he should be doing, right? He's killing it. So, yeah.
And you talk a little bit more to the age bias thing and what you think that might be going through the heads of these people and what's not okay about it? Because I don't think that people really, it's easy to pull out the not a good fit for the culture card.
Yeah,
it's a really easy card to pull. You know what I mean? Yeah. What do you think that people are kind of thinking, and what is not appropriate about, sort of that way of looking at candidates?
I think that whole concept is dated and breeds a huge amount of problems, right? A culture fit means, oh, hey, that can mean anything. It could mean racism. It could mean sexism. It could mean classism. Often classism, to be honest, right? And why is any of that okay? Why are we masking that in culture fit? There's a new term that I'm sure you're aware of called culture add, right? I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. What you don't want is an arsehole in your team who's rude and abrasive. Of course not. But that is usually not a part of the conversation, right? We simply don't interview people like that or find people like that often. So why aren't you thinking, hey, everyone on this team has come from an Ivy League school. Why don't we hire someone who grew up in a not so well off area, who's really driven and has that perspective on life? Because that could be really healthy for us to learn in that way. And also, aside from it just being the right thing to do, your buyers probably buy from all walks of life. Maybe you're dealing with executive buyers, but I know a lot of executive buyers that have worked their way to the top and started from literally nothing. And surely having those different perspectives and those different walks of life are going to make you more appealing to your audience and give you a broader coverage. And also neurodiversity, right? Neurodiversity is a huge thing. As someone who has dyslexia and ADHD, I have a very limited prefrontal cortex. So I'm able to basically see things that other people can't see, put together. But also I can't process things as quick. So if you want me to read something, it will take me twice as long because my brain pylons, someone without ADHD and dyslexia, their brain pylons are like that. So it's very short, sharp communication. Mine are out here. So the advantage is I use my whole brain. It's a bit more taxing to do a simple task, but for a big task, it means that I will have a perspective that most people won't have. And hiring for those things are going to make you a lot more efficient as a sales org or any type of org.
I mean, it's what the data supports too, that 100% of the data supports a diverse sales team across gender, race, class, all that kind of stuff. So I think a big part of it, it sounds like from you, is just being aware of it and being more intentional about creating diversity on your team, like being more intentional about it. And I think bias, the most important thing is to know that you have bias, just like everyone else. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I told you that the first thing I didn't look for oftentimes on a resume is when a person graduated so I could get an idea of their age. I catch myself doing that. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's being aware that, hey, you have bias. Everyone does, and like being intentional about not letting that impact your decision making.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're aware of your bias, you can deal with it, you can mitigate it, and you can be responsible about it. If you're unaware of it, it's going to present in the worst ways, right? So completely.
Yep. Yeah. Dude, this has been great, man. We got into the list building piece and how people should be allowed to get some help with that. Freedom over sequences, all about that, the activity and making it more about their outcome. We talked about age bias. I got some quick rapid fire questions before you take off. Is that cool?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So first question, this is related to outbound and we don't have to choose, but it's kind of fun to kind of pose this question. So if you had to choose between phone, email, and social for outbound, what do you pick and why?
Am I picking for TrainYo?
For you personally. Yeah. If you're calling right now for TrainYo, not calling, if you're prospecting and you could only use one channel, phone, email, or social, what do you pick?
For me, it really depends on the market. I love the phone, but social's killed it for us. And I think social is the future. So I'd pick social right now. And awesome. I'd always pick my I would never work a market where I couldn't work social because I love that opportunity. So yeah, it would be social. But I love the phone. I hate email. So we won't talk on that.
Email is just like, it's the toughest channel, I think. It's so hard to write good emails. What is something you believe about sales that most would disagree with?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I'm trying to think what a mentor of mine would say, because Benjamin Dennehy has a lot of controversial opinions that I tend to agree with. Sales is about being liked. I think it's important to be nice and hospitable, but in my mind, relationship building can be important and is important, but it's more important to just be regiment on the problem and be more of a challenger type salesperson. I think you're going to build more credibility and that will in turn serve the relationship in the long run. But I don't know if that's controversial. Sorry.
I think there's a lot of people that argue back and forth on that. And yeah, relationships totally important. But I mean, the bigger the deal size, the more important the other stuff is. All the logical sides, of the deal. Last one. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself as a rookie sales professional?
Ooh. I would pick the niche I want to build in sooner. So I haven't sold to salespeople since the first time I sold to salespeople was starting TrainYo. And we did a really good job of building our brand and building our network early on through many different initiatives. But you can't start that soon enough. We've seen the craziest returns from building our network in terms of investors, in terms of BD, people to buy from, building a social brand. All of that has been the biggest thing we could have possibly done, and we've done it in a short space of time. I would have loved to have done that sooner, but I was never going to brand about A/B testing to DevOps. It's not in me. It's not what I'm passionate about, right? So I would have picked a company like SalesLoft or Outreach, and I would have gone to one of those companies and started building in that way to start with.
Love it. Well, it's been great having you on. If you're listening, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, all that kind of good stuff. And where can people go to connect with you and learn more about TrainYo?
Yeah, so if you're looking to get into SaaS as an SDR, you don't have to have any experience or education. Just have to show up with the right attitude and put the work in. We can train you for free. It's always free, over 8 weeks using the best in the world live. Apply through the website. Quite honestly, the website needs a buff. We built it for no money on Wix, and then we need to do something about that, and we will soon. LinkedIn is the best place to go see our content, follow our people, follow Jess, follow Liam, follow Omar, follow Paula, myself, Jordan. We've got a really amazing team here, and they do a lot on social, a lot on branding. There's a lot of good content to be consumed. And yeah, that's it really. If you want to hire SDRs that have been pre-trained and pre-ramped, hit me up.